We are continuing our study of Section E, A Greater Hope. And we have thus far covered the first of that first subsection, the faith of our fathers. Now we are looking at a better example for us. And we're going to be looking at chapter 31, chapter 11, verses 39 through chapter 12, verse 17. So we're going to start off firstly by reading that section. Please follow along in your Bibles as we read chapter 11, verses 39, and then we're going to go into the first part of chapter 12. Okay. These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witness, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. Let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who, for the joy set before him, endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the Son of God, the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. God disciplines his children. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. And have you completely forgotten this word of encouragement that addresses you as a father addresses his son? It says, "My son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when he rebukes you, because the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and he chastens everyone he accepts as his son." Endure hardship as a discipline. God is treating you as his children. For what children are not disciplined by their father? If you are not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you are not legitimate, not true sons and daughters at all. Moreover, we have had human fathers who disciplined us, and we have respected them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father of spirits and live? They disciplined us for a little while as they thought best, but God disciplines us for our good, in order that we may share in his holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful later on. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Therefore, strengthen your feeble mind, your feeble arms and weak knees. Make level paths for your feet, so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. Make every effort to live in peace with everyone and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. See that no one is sexually immoral or is godless like Esau, for he shall seek for a single meal sold his inheritance rights as the oldest son. Afterward, as you know, he wanted to inherit this blessing. He was rejected. Even though he sought the blessing with tears, he could not change what he had done. So let us take a look at the section that we have just read. Let's look a little more closely at it. We're looking at chapter 11:39 through chapter 12:17, a better example for us. And we see that something better. We see something better. These saints all received commendation from God, but they did not receive all that was promised, not during the course of their lifetime, their 80 or so years on this earth. In Christ, we have realized the promise. They will experience its fulfillment in the resurrection, when believers of the old and new covenant will join. But we get to experience it right away. Suddenly the scene shifts, and we start seeing a sports stadium in chapter 12. See, what has happened is, we said this before, whenever you see a therefore, you have to question, what is it there for? And so we want to look before. So we've seen in chapter 11 all of these. We've walked down this hallway, this museum, and we've looked at the examples of the great faith of our forefathers. We've looked on the walls, and we journeyed down this hallway and looked at all of the examples of faith. And now we've reached the end of the hallway. And so the writer is saying, now, and now, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witness. And so we're surrounded by this great cloud of witness. Now, because of that, now let's do something. Because we are surrounded by this great crowd of witness, let us throw off everything that hinders. And so it shows us, we have the idea that we are in a stadium running a race, marked out for us. We're waiting. And in the stands, we have our forefathers that we've just mentioned. We have our loved ones that have gone on ahead of us. And they're in the stands cheering for us. Go, you can do it. Come on. They're cheering for us. And we're admonished to run this race marked out for us and to fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. So, since we are surrounded, getting a picture of this, we're in the stadium running, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witness, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance. We're going to run with everything we've got, the race marked out for us, and let us fix our eyes on Jesus. Put on the blinders like the horses. Fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy, and then they tell the example of, he gives the example of what Jesus did. For the joy set before him, he looked past the cross to see what was ahead in his future. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, he scorned the shame, and then when his work was finished, he went and sat down at the right hand of God. So the writer shows us, Jesus' example. And so he admonishes us. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, we imagine living our lives every day like that, every morning getting up and remembering, I am surrounded by this great cloud of witness, and that I have this race that's marked out just for me, and I got to run this race, and I can't get distracted by little things and problems or distractions or hobbies or habits or addictions or anything. I got to run this race marked out for me. And so, what an inspiration. I love this. That is my favorite verse in the Bible. Let's move on to verse 4 through 13, how God trains us. So Christians' attitudes to hardship and opposition, verses 4 through 6. It is never to be as bad as it could be. Behind difficulties is a father's loving heart. Both rebuke and punishment comes from God, and rebuke is a verbal correction, and punishment makes the rebuke unforgettable. But there's a discomfort and hardship born for the love of Christ, and are viewed as privileges and blessings, which incompatible glories yet come. So here's the thing. This discipline is part of it. It's no differently than we are with our children. We don't want them to go out into the street because they may get hit by a car. We live on a busy street, and they have to. It's very important for their own life, or they're going to die. So it's that grave that they not learn not to run out in the street. And so in order to get that lesson, we have to make sure that if they run out into the street, and they happen not to run over, a car throws on brakes and they just barely escape death, we'll run out and get them. and we bring them back to the sidewalk and we admonish them. You cannot run into the street. And then we have to give them a lesson. We have to give them the punishment so that they remember it. So we tell them, you have to come inside and you can't play ball for a week outside. Or we have to give them some punishment so that they remember that. So the next time they go outside and play, they're not likely to run into the street, because they know that the last time they ran into the street, they didn't get to go play outside. And our little brains are no more than a little 2-year-old. Our little 2-year-old brains, as compared to God, is way, way like the example of an adult would give to a 2-year-old not to run into a street. Because we don't even see how death awaits us. We have to trust that our Father knows what's best for us. And He's going to help us. And we have to listen to Him. We have to do what He says. And we have to accept our punishment and our rebuke and our pruning. Because the pruning makes us better. The pruning, the trimming back from things makes us better. It's the vineyard he talks about in John. John talks about how God is the vine dresser. We're the vines, and we have to be pruned. A grapevine, the natural instinct of a grapevine is to grow leaves, and left to itself, a grapevine will grow leaves, and that's it. What has to happen is the leaves have to be cut back. The branches have to be cut back, which forces the grapevine to grow grapes. In the same way, our natural instinct is to sin. Sin is good. The King James Version tells us, by faith, what's his name? By faith, Moses, when he became age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with God's people than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. So sin is good. And so our natural instinct is to go after what's good, to sin. That's what, left to our own devices, we would just go and sin. But God has to prune us and peel us back, cut us back, so that we then grow into righteousness. He has to cut us off from some people. He has to remove certain things from our lives. He has to take away some TV programs, or has to cut us off different things. And so my thing is, look, I know I gotta get pruned. I know I have to be pruned in order to be better. I would rather prune myself as much as possible, so that, and limit the amount that God has to prune me. So I'm going to look at myself and look at ways, am I being productive? Am I staying on task for God? Am I on my path? And I constantly look at those things and evaluate those. And if I see maybe I've been getting too far off into my hobby, or maybe I've been being distracted by TV, or maybe I'm not doing certain things, or studying enough, or whatever. And so what I then do is I prune back. I prune those things away. I prune away that TV. I prune away the hobby. I prune back the hobby some, and I get back on track. And this way, I believe that when God comes along and looks and see what's Teena doing, okay, she kind of on track. Okay, does she need pruning? Yeah, she needs a little pruning here and a little pruning there. Okay, she's okay. So then, in my thought is that I will require less pruning if I'm being proactive and pruning myself. So you don't like pruning, you don't like punishment, you don't like rebuke, then be proactive about it and try and, look and examine and do these things on your own. That's my take on it anyway. That's my take on it. Let's keep going. Okay, so let us look at now. We're continuing with how God trains us, chapters 4 through 13. We're now going to look at verses 7 and 8. They are signs we regard as genuine children. Verse 7 and 8. Another reason for patient endurance. verses 9 through 11. God makes no mistakes. A later harvest of righteousness and peace will come. We'll see that. We see examples of that in Romans 5, 3 through 5. I'm not going to read those now because we're trying to continue to move on, but read those. James 1, 3 through 4 and 1 Peter 1 through 7. Look at those, compare those examples to this. Two actions are urged in verses 12 and 13. We see, first of all, to strengthen our feeble arms and go boldly to God. And secondly, to make level paths for our feet. Others watch the way we are enduring suffering. So we're Christ's calling card. We're the brochure, if you will. Non-believers are looking to see how we handle things. And now, moving into the next section, the dangers to watch, verses 14 through 17. But we pursue, firstly, a peace with everyone as far as possible, as much as it's within our control. We're seeking peace with everyone. And secondly, a holiness before God. And we're called to live righteously. And failure means missing God's grace. What a disappointment to miss God's grace. Strife results in defilement of the body and the soul. And finally, in this section, we see an example. Living like non-believers repeats godliness, the godliness of Esau. We saw how Esau rejected his birthright. He gave it up for a cup of soup, and then it led to his ultimate rejection. And so we want to beware. We want to watch out for that. Beware of that snare. And so that will conclude that section of a better example for us. Verses 11, chapter 11:39 through 12:17. So the writer starts out by showing us the old paradigm of Mount Sinai, and he contrasts the old and new covenants. We said that there's Exodus versus Revelation. Exodus 19:16 versus Revelation 21. I want to read a little bit of that. I know we're running kind of short on our lesson now at this point, but let me look at Exodus 19. Let's look at Exodus 19 and show how scary this was. It's really scary to see. Let's see. It went up to God. Let me start out 19:16. On the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning with a thick cloud over the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. And then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. And as the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke with the voice of God answered him. And so I'm going to go forward, and it says, go down and warn the people that so they do not force their way through to see the Lord, and many of them perish. So even the priests who approach the Lord must consecrate themselves, or the Lord will break out against them. Moses said to the Lord, the people cannot come up to Mount Sinai because you yourself warned us. Put limits around the mountains and set it apart as holy. The Lord replied, go down and bring Aaron up with you. The priests and the people must not force their way through, or he will break out against them. And so there's this warning. It's very scary. Can you imagine all those things happening? And so that was very scary. That's the kind of experience the people had with where the Lord resides, at Mount Sinai. Now let's look at the experience that the people experience of where the Lord resides. Let's look at Revelation 21, 1 through 4. And it says, Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and new earth had passed. For the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down from the heaven of God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, And God himself will be with them, and they will be his God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. So we see that. Now imagine that picture, that embracing, that picture as juxtaposed against that old paradigm. And so we see that the new paradigm offers a much better way. And so let me take a look at what my notes said here. My notes said here, I want to just make sure that I covered everything. Um, so my notes said that we experience a better transcendence. There are 7 elements of the worship community. First, a spiritual fellowship that we saw at Mount Zion, an external fellowship, which we saw thousands of angels, and a universal fellowship, the church of the firstborn, a divine fellowship, the God of judge. We see an immoral fellowship, the spirit of righteousness, immortal, and a redeeming fellowship, Jesus and the mediator, and a forgiving fellowship, the sprinkled blood. And so now we have seen the first 4 warnings. We're now going to get the fifth and final warning of this book. We have, just as a recap, we saw the first warning, which was we found in chapter 2, which was a warning against paying attention. Then we saw in chapter 3 a warning about unbelief. And then we saw in chapter 5 the third warning, a warning about apostasy. Then we saw the 4th warning in chapter 10, a warning about falling away again, another warning about apostasy. And now we are going to see this 5th and final warning in verses 25 through 29 of this chapter 12, a warning against turning back from the truth. We see, as an example, let's look at chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. The Hebrews they're in danger of drifting away. And so they're shaking. The shaking of Sinai did not dissuade them. Heaven and earth will shake, and there will be no escape. Not just earth, but heaven also will shake. There is the gratitude that leads to worship in verse 28. God is powerful, yet compassionate. His love destroys what it cannot purify, and purifies what it cannot destroy. And so that brings us to our conclusion of chapter 12. It also brings us to the conclusion of this 3rd section on the outline. Remember, our outline of Hebrews had 5 chapters, and this brings us to, 5 sections. This brings us to the end of section 3. In our next lesson, we are going to pick up with section 4, chapter 13. And that is where we'll start our next lesson. So until we meet again, be blessed.